You're recording. Yeah. Okay. So I'm running this channel about like classical music. And the more that I think about it, the more I realize that like I have no idea what classical music is.
Me either.
I asked this to somebody the other day. Her comparison was that it's like porn. You know it when you see it.
But just like porn, classical music kind of depends on who you ask too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I remember hearing a comment at VidCon when Lindsay Sterling was performing, and someone said, "Oh, I'm so glad that she's bringing classical music to the world." And I got kind of conflicted because I don't want to trash what she's doing.
I used to have a student. He was a violin player, and he liked to sort of recreationally on Lindsay Sterling.
It's a common hobby.
Right, yeah. People just love to do it, especially violinists that will never be a tenth as successful as her. Right. And so, I think classical musicians get a little protective of what classical music is to them. I used to work at the old spaghetti factory, and people used to, leave us nasty reviews saying that, we didn't even come close to serving proper Italian presentation of the cuisine, or our pasta was in no way in line with traditional Italian cooking practices. And it's just like, well, yeah, no it's not what we were trying to do.
Yeah. But then that gets to the question, what makes something classical?
I think in general, people can agree on some things being for sure classical music.
Yeah.
You play a Higdon thing and people are like, yeah, that's classical music.
Yeah. I mean, there is still that cultural idea of like the pantheon of composers, but it seems really arbitrary who's in it and who's not. For instance, in the classical era, you think Haydn, you think Mozart. But there were other immensely popular composers at the time that have since been ignored. Like, nobody talks about Dittersdorf much anymore.
Yeah, I was thinking about that on the way over here. It seems like a lot of our definition of classical music just falls to what manages to stick.
There is kind of a cultural sense that by dint of being old, it's sort of more important or better. People were looking down at Rossini as just sort of a tunesmith who churned things out. And now he's like revered.
Yeah. Things even back then came in and out of fashion as well. And you look at how people sort of stayed away from the symphony for a while, post Beethoven.
Yeah.
And
that is a big part of it. The whole Beethoven myth in general.
Yeah.
Just created all sorts of problems for us.
In terms of classical composers, we still have a huge German bias.
Yeah.
Who to think of as the sort of standard from which all music deviates,
Right.
All of the music theory classes that I've taught, it's like everything is piling up, groping towards Beethoven.
Yeah.
And then everything after that is some sort of strange addition to Beethoven.
Yeah.
Even.
And that was constructed by German philosophers and theorists. How can we pull out of that something that makes this different music from other music that we're talking? Like, is there anything that links that 19th century German music with 19th century French music with 19th century Italian music?
In terms of what does and doesn't sound like classical music, I can't really sort of come up with an exact point that must be reached. I think a lot of it has to do with how the performers, and possibly the composer if he or she is still alive, how they present it to you. It's how they intend that music to be received. I think maybe like my aunt, for example, might hear the some part of the Jurassic Park theme out of context, and she might be like, "Oh, that's some pretty good classical music there," whereas of course nobody at the Jacob School would consider that classical music.
People would turn up their noses if you put on a concert of John Williams film music. But
not me.
the thing that infuriates me is that people won't turn up their noses if you play a concert of Mendelssohn's incidental music from plays.
Right.
How are they different?
Time, I guess, maybe.
One of the reasons people look down on it now is that we have sort of the vestige of the late Romantic ideal of the artist sort of channeling the artist as a vessel in an almost religious sense for the art to just flow forth from them. And if you're writing something for commercial reasons, then you're wrong.
Yeah. And that's completely true. You see all over the place, if something is enjoyed by a lot of people,
that it has to suck.
Then it must suck, and they must be wrong.
And there is the common thread with him in specific of, music from a later movie sounds quite a lot like music that he already wrote for an earlier movie, but you can literally do that with any composer.
Those are two hollow criticisms of certain types of music. One, that it's made just for people to enjoy it, God forbid, and then two, that it's not completely original. And there's this sort of idea that a lot of time being put into something also contributes to its artistic merit as well.
But I also feel like that's a very 19th century look at things, because like in the 18th century, people were churning out symphonies every week because there was a dinner party and they had to have music for it.
Yeah.
But even then, like, church music was church music, chamber music was chamber music. It wasn't all one genre the way that we treat it now.
We do think of it all underneath the same umbrella. And maybe that's fine. Maybe it's all under the same umbrella of music from a long time ago that is still performed.
Yeah. But then how do we add the stuff that's not from a long time ago into that? I think that many people know this by now, but I live in the gray area. That's where I'm happiest. I don't like trying to squeeze things into boxes. And to me, the fact that we can't squeeze everything into boxes makes me feel like I shouldn't really try. And when I'm thinking about like what music that I want to focus on to tell people about on this channel, obviously I'm going to have, there are sort of cultural expectations. I also want to talk about the other stuff that's not as easy to define. There's merit to looking at pentatonics as performing modern day madrigals. There's merit to looking at Phantom of the Opera as an opera. So, in conclusion.
Okay.
What is classical music? Answer.
We don't know. Just Vivaldi.
If you think John Williams is formulaic.
Larkin's posture is so funny.
He's very dignified.
Right.
He also really likes pushing off of things with his front paws.
That's why I like he's constantly like, ugh.